Hi, everybody. Come on, wake up. Hi, everybody. We're gonna have some fun, or we're gonna try. We're gonna have fun. You guys, maybe a nightmare for you, but no, no, thank you so much for coming to this panel. This is one of the more left of center panels at BIME. And I created it because it's a topic that I want to talk more about. And I really hope that you're very blessed to have a very diverse set of panelists. So first thing is, Theo missed his flight. So he is not here, and he sends his apologies, but he's on a plane this afternoon, and he is on a panel tomorrow. So if you want to meet War Publishing and you want to meet Theo, he's here tomorrow. And he's a lovely guy, so. And my name is Shane. I run a company called Sound Diplomacy. We are one of the people that programs the conference at BIME as well. And I would like our panelists to introduce themselves. And then we'll get into it. You each have a mic.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Mia, and I'm an artist manager at a company called This Is Music. We specialize in electronic and pop music, and we are based in London, UK.
Hi, my name is Ekaterina. I'm a manager of On The Go band, and I also run a company called Music Development Russia that is now dealing with a lot of different bands, Russian bands, promoting them abroad. And we also provide management, PR, pretty much all the services for the bands.
Hi, my name's Alan Davey. I'm controller of BBC Radio 3 for the last 9 months. We're a kind of classical jazz and world station. But before that, I was chief executive of the Arts Council in England and had a lot to do with pop music funding and funding for all kinds of music and supporting entrepreneurs in various ways.
So before we get started, after our panel is the first ever Russian export showcase, ever, because of her. So you're all coming. Two amazing bands, both of whom I've seen before, are playing, and you get free drinks at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So I'll drag everybody to the showcase, okay? So the reason why we set up this panel is twofold. One is, I believe that the term startup and the term entrepreneur can sometimes be overused, often be overused, and also the concept of an entrepreneur to me doesn't mean that you have to start your own company, because if you're in a big association or organization, you can still think and act in that way. And we wanted to look at what, as a music industry across the UK, I'm based in the UK, but I can speak for Canada as well because I'm Canadian, and a new market that some of us may not know anything about, which is Russia. What are the challenges that we face, and what are we all looking forward to as creative entrepreneurs? So first off, how many of you in the audience have your own company or started your own company? Okay, so quite a few. That's probably more than half. And it doesn't mean that you're not but everyone in this room, to me, is an entrepreneur. So my first question to Mia is, you manage over a dozen artists, and I know you guys have business all over the world. How do you approach each artist as its own individual business, or do you take a more overall approach to This Is Music and how it's run?
Yeah, we actually call ourselves an artist-led management company, so we actively encourage the artists to build their own business, to build their own brand, and then we essentially run 15 different businesses within our business and hope that maybe some of those will go on to be profitable, and in turn that we'll all get paid. So we look at it that way, and we try and adapt each individual business to its place in the market. So we span generally electronic and pop music, but within that quite large spectrum of music, there's lots of different ways that you can place your artists, and it's about finding the place for your artist business in the bigger picture of the music industry.
Do you have to register every single one and run every single one as its own independent business?
A lot of them.
Well, is that a barrier? Or is
Sometimes, I mean, it's more about building a brand that you can then capitalize on as a business later on if you want to register it in order to, sell merchandise, or if you want to actually register the name. But it's more about having a concept and an identity and a brand that can then become a business.
So, Music Development Russia, is that a for-profit business or a non-for-profit business? Tell me how it began, what some of the challenges are that you face, because you probably face different challenges in Russia than we face here in Spain or in the UK.
I guess Russia is a very challenging country for music industry and for music business. The thing about Russia is that Russia has really big market with lots of opportunities for musicians, for Russian musicians, for international musicians. You have a lot of people ready to listen to new music and ready to consume, but Russia doesn't really have industry that controls and organizes it. So that's what we're trying to do with Music Development Russia. We're trying to organize and trying to create the industry that actually works. And we started it with my first, I hope, the most successful band on the go. So I decided to build this whole project and the whole business around the band. And I was the first Russian independent band that started as a business project. So when we just started to work together with guys from the band, we decided to make a proper business plan with deadlines, and for 1 year, for 5 years, and for 10 years. It is really important, I think, to know where you're going. And it is really important with your artists to, have the same goals and to see the future in the same way.
So what is the goal in 10 years? I've never, I wish I had a 10-year plan.
For On The Go, of course, to be really famous in the whole world, and that's what we are doing.
Do you have a 10-year plan with Little Boots, for example, or with any of the other artists you work with, or?
We arena tours. That's the goal. No, we try to be very flexible, because at the level that we're at, which is not at the minute arena tours, you have to be able to adapt and be able to change how your business works, because sometimes things don't go the way you plan them to. So it's a very fluid concept of the 10-year plan for us.
So now we have these two sort of, completely open independent businesses, and now we also have someone from the BBC, which is a very, very large organization. But Alan, do you believe it's possible in a large organization as well to act as an entrepreneur? And how do you approach that in your job running a radio station and the largest music festival in the world, the BBC Proms?
Well, I do think it's possible. And throughout my kind of life working for big organizations, I've realized that you get the best results if you free and empower people to have entrepreneurial thought, to have to know what their resources are, to be able to follow ideas within those resources, and having a sense of direction and bandwidth, which you probably have to have, but allowing a lot of freedom within that bandwidth, and people knowing what that freedom is, because we're in a creative industry, and if my team, I've only been in the BBC 9 months, but I've learned that the creativity in those teams, given the right amount of freedom, can come up with all kinds of things that we never knew we would have followed when we started out. And that, for me, is the ideal of a creative company. The other thing about large companies as well, of which the BBC is one, is actually if you're operating in the music industry, the music market conditions have changed, the industry's changed, and there's a lot of entrepreneurship going on, a lot of startups, a lot of bottom-up activity happening. And one of the things I'm interested in is how a big organisation like the BBC, with lots of resources, with lots of things to offer people, can actually link with the entrepreneurs inside, if you like, link with the entrepreneurs outside. So, things like BBC Introducing and as that develops, our new generation artists, that kind of thing, where we can work with people to give them airtime, to give them online time, to give them showcases, and also to kind of almost mentor and help along the way. I think that's really, really important as well. So there's kind of two things a big organisation, if it's a good big organisation, can do.
So I want to start with the barriers and then move into the positives, I don't mean to start with the negative, but I believe that there's infinite amount of expertise and support and and advice, good and bad, for startups. There's many companies who they make a living advising startups. But what about companies that are 2 years old or 3 years old? What about a band in their second record? Is there, when we're talking about creative entrepreneurship, is there a level where you encounter challenges in the music industry because we're not set up as well to support early stage businesses rather than startups? Or do you believe that that's true? Or am I just wrong? Yeah.
I think it's hard because you're always faced with challenges in the music industry, especially with how quickly it's changing, and you have to be able to see what's coming and be able to be inventive and be creative and be innovative and look towards new technologies. And even if it is a new startup, you have to kind of be able to adapt to new situations. And it is a barrier, but I think with a little bit of flexibility in your plan, you can work around things and figure it out. And if you're smart, you should be able to do it.
So what tricks have you learned a couple of years in? How do you not waste time?
I guess for us it's been, because I mainly manage independent artists who are self-releasing or who are working with label services. The biggest challenges for us are budgets and how do we release an album? How do we fund a whole album campaign? How do we pay for PR teams, for radio pluggers, for someone to shoot press shots, like album cover, videos? There's a lot of money that goes into an album campaign, and for us it's been how to fund that has been the biggest challenge. And I've learned that you can be very creative with budgets and that you can find be just open and work with people who are as passionate as you about the project. Find people who think like you, who are like-minded, who are involved, and who will do it for less than maybe they would on other projects, but that are in love with the project as you are and that just want to do it for their passion. And find like-minded people, and you can do things on very little money.
Other entrepreneurs.
With other entrepreneurs, yeah.
Well, it's the in Russia, I think we thought we'd use this panel as like a lesson on Russia as well, because then we can learn too. Because this is the only time you're on a panel, so we're putting you on the spot.
Yeah. Thank you.
But
Shane.
is it more of a barter economy there in Russia now? Is it, or is there a service base in terms of how you're developing the bands that you work with and how you're developing music development in Russia?
I guess in Russia we face the same challenges as everywhere else. When the band just starts, they really need to make good records and to make people notice them, but then in 2 or 3 years they really need to get on a different level. And in order to get to this level, they need to get budget and they need to get money and investment. In order to go to a showcase, for example, in order to go to international market, and that's where you have to be creative as well. What we learned that you really should use all your contacts. At one point, we just sat down and made a list of contacts, even though not many of them were directly related to music industry or to our area. Just made a contact list of all the people you know who work anywhere in any sector, any company, and then you just, sometime you just need this or this area, and you go to this person and you find out that, okay, a guy from an oil company is interested in music and he dreamt about being a musician, and he is really happy to help Russian band go abroad and become a part of international market. Or you just meet a Russian official at a concert in Holland, for example, who also dreamt about being a musician. So that's just a lot of networking, and that's how you fight these barriers in Russia and to get budgets.
Look at failed musicians, essentially rich failed musicians. That's how we build our business. That's a good business model. Now on to the BBC. In that context, Alan. No.
You think I'm a rich failed musician?
No, not you.
Well, actually, not to go back to my Arts Council experience with the Momentum Music Fund that we set up with PRSF and Vanessa over there, which was actually explicitly aimed at bands or artists who got to a certain level but needed to get to the next level and were finding difficulty in getting the investment and the right investment to get them for the tour that's a step up and that takes them somewhere else, or the second album, or even to get all the kind of things around a tour and a campaign going. And it seemed to the analysis that we did before we got into that, that's what was missing. So you had things like BBC Introducing, which could get you noticed, and that was one kind of help that was there. But what happens after that? And I think actually kind of looking at all the various stages and kind of working at what the problems are in each of the individual stages is quite an important thing to do, being aware of that.
I feel like there's a lot of potential for artists and brands to collaborate, but there isn't a simple, because that's where the money is, the advertising, there's so much money in it, and there are so many brands that want to do something creative, and there are so many artists that are creative that need money, that there should be a way to connect those and to have, I feel like when that connection is made well, then that's when it really works, and that can take the artist to the next level. But it's about, I guess, finding the right brand to work with. Creatives Project Vice do it a lot. They run a really great project where they invest in artists that maybe need a little bit of help to put on a really special tour, and they're crossing the boundaries between music and fashion and technology, and there's a company that has money to invest that wants to do it, and it showcases them and it gives them a really good opportunity to do something creative and do what they love, but they just needed that bit of funding. So I think some kind of better connection between those two worlds needs to be made.
And I think it's also important to build, long-term relationship with the brand. Once you found someone who is ready to invest, it's not about just one project you do together, but it's about long-term relationships, so you both profit on both sides from this.
So that's an interesting point that you made, Alan, and then Mia and Katja, you expanded on, and that's something that I never did, and I don't do running a business, is look at all the problems in stages. So when we're saying how to build new entrepreneurs, do you believe that more time needs to be looked at compartmentalizing the challenges rather than just looking at it as an overall challenge? Because we've all talked about money, so let's talk about other barriers. Money's a barrier to everything, but money is a renewable resource. Money is available. If someone needs it, it can be found. But time is not a renewable resource.
Yeah, and I mean, you talked about studying and looking at the different stages and the different kinds of support that might be needed. But when you're an entrepreneur yourself and you're in the middle of it all, you're just going for whatever you can get, and it's kind of educating potential investors actually that the music industry, it's not necessarily frightening. You might not make vast amounts of money, but you might get some money back. It is comprehensible, and there is some science behind it. There are some numbers behind it, and it's not necessarily as scary as you might think. But we have this problem in creative industries in general. I think in finding the right kind of venture capital with the right kind of attitude behind it. And that's about getting the analysis right, which a lot of people are beginning to do.
The thing is, we have a panel on venture capital later, so, just which I don't think very few conferences do. But I think that, in terms of, to me, and this is a question to the panel, in terms of developing creative entrepreneurs, we do always talk about in the music industry lack of budget. Everyone complains about not having enough money. But sometimes I don't see people often complaining about not having a big enough network, even though maybe some should or some shouldn't. And you said you're developing this you wrote down every single contact that you know, and then you went through it. I've never done that. So was the focus more on, is the focus always more on the relationship development and seeing how you can get money out of that? And my question is how much time do you spend thinking about researching new networks and do you feel that that's part of being an entrepreneur? Gotcha.
I think it's like the biggest part of being an entrepreneur, and it is all about networking, at least in our case and in my case in Russia. It is all about knowing people and knowing the right door where you have to go to make next step. Because, as I already mentioned, music industry is really difficult one in Russia, and it's really difficult to prove that it may work and that it may be profitable. So it is about networking, it is about persuading people who are not in music business that they can profit from it and that it can be interesting for their company, that it can be it's not always about money, it is a lot about image as well. We do a lot of image projects with different brands and with different companies who are interested in that. So networking.
Yeah, I feel maybe just in the English-speaking market it might be slightly different. It's in England at least there's such a saturation of all sorts of music, of a lot of very mediocre music, that to stand out as an artist you do have to get a lot of things right. And if you manage to get all those things right, and it's about building a brand, an image, and an aesthetic that makes sense to the music and having the whole package complete, then I think that's you've won half the challenge already, and the funding is the next step. But getting it right is a big help in the sense of that's what will connect with audiences. And if you can build a world that the audiences want to engage with, that they can believe with, and then I think they'll buy your tickets, won't they, for live shows, and that's what you want. Maybe they'll stream you on Spotify.
So how did you approach the proms in an entrepreneurial way? You're always looking at new content. You're putting classical music into hip hop. You're putting classical music into indie rock. These are things that some people don't usually do. How do you approach that, and how do you ensure that the content's always new and that it's...
I'd say what we have to create as we're kind of looking how the proms develops is a creatively entrepreneurial approach to it. I mean, the great thing about the proms is it's underwritten by the BBC, so we don't have to make a profit. We do actually make money, and half of it is from ticket sales, but otherwise we wouldn't be able to put it on in the same way that we do. But without authentic, creatively entrepreneurial ideas, then the thing wouldn't be developing, and it will need to develop in the next 3 years. It can never stand still, as the whole music industry is.
Does everybody know what the proms is, just so we make sure? The BBC Proms it's the world's largest music festival. You can explain it. I'm not going to explain
it takes place over 8 weeks in London in the summer. 92 broadly classical concerts. But this year we also, had a Pete Tong prom, a grime prom. There's a lot of jazz and that kind of stuff. And the basic thing about it is it needs to have musical integrity. And when it crosses boundaries, it does so for an artistic reason. We're not doing it for monetary purposes. So that's why I said creatively entrepreneurial. we're not being pushed by a simple need to sell every single ticket there is. We can take risks. And we can try things out artistically that might not. So that's why the investment that we put into that is venture capital in trying out new things. But just to return to your question about networking and all that, I mean, I think it really is important. But for networking to be effective, you really need to have that notion of what you're about and what the thing you want to take to the next stage really is. And the clarity that you were talking about, Mia, I think is really, really important, because you need to sell the thing to potential investors, partners, or whatever. And I think that clarity as you network, you don't just go into a room and network randomly, you do it with clarity. And I'm surprised, Shane, you haven't analysed your black address book, because it's probably sensational.
Who has organized contacts, really? Like, we try. Of course, Benji Rogers does. No, we're relatively organized, but everyone can always be better. One thing that I noticed in the music industry, and I used to work on Canadian music export, and we span multiple genres. We did black metal, and we did jazz, and everything in between. And sometimes I think as creative entrepreneurs in the music industry, we kind of ignore other sectors of the music industry that have no value to us, or seem to have no value to us. Like, the publishing sector tends to communicate with the publishing sector, and the live sector communicates with the live sector. And do you think that to build more creative entrepreneurs, we need to change that? Because as the music industry diversifies, it's actually becoming more siloed. That's my argument. Or do you disagree with me? Manager?
I think these days, as a manager, you kind of have to be a jack of all trades. You have to understand all different aspects of the music industry. So I would disagree, because I think that there are lots of music companies that are expanding that maybe started off initially as management companies, but now with how easy it is for artists to set up their own labels thanks to companies like Cobalt Label Services, you have to also have an understanding of how label and distribution works, and marketing, and then publishing as well, obviously. So I think it's definitely beneficial to have a wider grasp on the music industry now as a manager, and probably helpful at some point in your career. So I try and be as inquisitive and curious and try and learn about all other sectors. I can't speak for them.
Well, I've noticed in Russia or in Latin and South America, everyone does everything, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And that's the whole point of music development in Russia, that we try to put the best professionals of the whole music industry, including publishers, PR agencies, record labels, and everyone together, to work together and to be more effective.
How successful is it?
We're here, so we'll see how it goes, and we exist just for 6 months, so.
Well, no, it's always, I see, in terms of going back, I'm constantly thinking in my head all the things that are related to the topic. And for me, in the music industry, we sometimes, and I'm stirring the pot here, everybody, or I'm trying to, so I'm the devil's advocate as the moderator. I think that we sometimes, maybe intentionally or unintentionally, build division in certain markets. When I've worked in certain markets, people who should get along don't. And do you see, how do you approach that in Russia, or do you see that as a problem, or in other countries that you've worked? I know you've worked in Georgia and Kazakhstan and lots of places that have music markets, everybody, that you could think about. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's actually the biggest problem of Russian music industry, that everyone wants to get the credit, and everyone wants to say, okay, I did this first, and so I'm the leader now in this industry. And I already mentioned to you that this showcase of ours made the whole revolution on the Russian market, and everyone started to call me asking why did you do that? How did you do that? How did you manage to do that? Why didn't you take us with you? It's like, okay, guys, I just want to move forward, and I think it's about time for Russian music to expand, for Russian music to become part of international market, and for letting people know about Russia and that music market actually exists there. But still, I think there will be this problem of, divisions in the Russian market, and that's what I'm trying to fight with.
Do you notice that as well in a large organization? I know you've worked for lots of large organizations in the past, Alan. Is that a barrier?
Well, I see kind of crossing divisions as a creative and entrepreneurial opportunity, if you like. So one of my great interests is our audience for contemporary music who cross over with Six Music, and two networks who are very, very different working together, which we've done this year, produced what I thought was a great result at WOMAD this year, for example. And that was interesting because, I mean, the people at Six Music just love music, as the people at Three. And the barriers, which were kind of there artificially because Six Music is one thing, Radio 3 is another thing, actually crumbled the minute you started talking about the project, the music, and the possibility. Because what I'm also finding is a lot of our stuff that Radio 3 does defines easy categories. So we're not a classical music station, just where we've got jazz, we've got things that you can't categorize. If I wasn't here tonight, if I wasn't here last night, I would have been at the launch of a band from a person I've been kind of mentoring. And the last argument with the press was what kind of music it was, how syncopated it was, what kind of rhythms it had. And that was the kind of classical jazz press. And I think we concluded it was probably world music in the end. But it was that was a kind of weird argument at the last moment, which kind of showed you that out there in the different constituencies of the music industry, there are still barriers in some people's minds. I don't think they're in listeners' minds or audience minds.
And does everyone understand Six Music is, I guess, the UK's, Radio Tress, I think it is, or the cool station? So for those who don't know. And for me, again, going back, how to build new entrepreneurs to strengthen companies. Well, looking back, what is the most important thing that you wish you knew when you started managing that you now know? Other than maybe, like me, basic accounting.
I wish I knew how much admin there was involved. I thought it would be No, I've learned a lot. It's such a different experience. I think management, especially, it's very you learn as you go along. There's not really a school of how to be a good manager or how to manage this artist successfully, because it's so individual, and it depends on the artist. It depends on the state of the music industry at that time.
Is that a problem? Should there be some formalized understanding or formalized education?
I mean, I think it exists. I think there are, music business management courses that you can do, and I'd love to know what they teach. But I think it's, as a manager, it's half of what I do is experience-based and what I've learned over the last years, but I think it's also trusting your instincts and knowing when something feels right and having the courage to stick behind what you believe in and just doing it, because there's always so many people involved at every point of an artist, whether it's development, whether it's touring, whether it's labels. It's throughout. There'll always be other people involved, and if you believe in something, just stick through it, because it's probably your artist best, and I think that's the piece of advice I'd give.
So all of this comes down to our gut thinking, like, especially in terms of why, looking at international markets from a Russian perspective as well, from a non-English speaking perspective. What are the ideas that you're proposing, or what are the things that you're proposing that Russian music can offer, so to speak, from a creative way? that you're working to get across here and in all the other places that you'll be showcasing? Like, how does it go through your mind in terms of what am I going to present? Or is it just, here's a great band, hope you like it? Yeah?
Yeah, that's how we start pretty much. I brought 2 great bands here, and yeah, they definitely fit, and they're definitely ready to become international. So that's how it is. I wouldn't say, yeah, every band is unique, and if I represent a band, I really feel that this band, deserves it. I really feel that the band deserves to be internationally successful and internationally known.
So what now that you're here, is there a few things that you wish that you knew when you started? What, looking back?
I wish I met you earlier, for example.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, no, really, I wish I would have...
I don't wish that of you. I don't wish that, no. I wish the same, but not...
No, I just wish I would have started...
So early for me, all right?
I wish I would have started a little bit earlier, and I wish I would have, found this way a little bit earlier. So as that's what we were talking about, time. That, we did lose some time. But I think we're, on the right path right now, and it's never too late.
So is time our barrier as creative entrepreneurs? How do we strengthen ourselves and strengthen companies, allow people more time?
Don't sleep.
What's that?
Don't sleep?
No sleep.
It's a bad idea.
More time would be great for all kinds of things. And it's interesting, the notion that we're operating on gut instinct only, but what you were describing me, it was more than gut instinct for me. It was kind of gut instinct plus kind of instinctive analysis. And I think people can be helped by other people's experiences and some kind of sense of analysis, and conversations like this, I think do help, where you kind of can actually talk about some of the things you do as an entrepreneur instinctively, and I think, well, how does that work without destroying it? But go on.
No. For me, it's recognizing this constant fight against time.
Yeah.
Isn't that one of the reasons why the Arts Council in England decided to support popular music artists, was looking at the fact that in the UK, when artists are developed, sometimes they aren't given the time that they need to define themselves in the market.
Yeah, and things do take time. Artists do take different time to develop, and different experiences will affect different artists in different ways. And you know how it's going. But so often you don't have that time, because you might get one shot of investment or one opportunity that takes you so far. How do you, and it's going back to the point I made earlier, how do you get to the next stage? Where's the time and space and money to do that?
And you have to do it really quickly, otherwise people lose interest and move on to the next thing. And so it's the lack of time and the creation of assets in that time and the funding of those assets and making sure that you've always got the next thing lined up and ready, because you can't take 2 years between putting out an album and your second album anymore. It's just people forget about you. You have to keep doing stuff all the time.
So do you see to me, I see always being an entrepreneur is realizing how not to waste other people's time and how to capture audience's time, whoever that audience may be, and spending my time thinking about other people's time. I really do. And I've got lots of time on planes. So and for me, you by allowing yourself patience by thinking about other people's impatience. Does that make sense? Because I always say, well, what does this person want and how fast do they want it? And when you're developing a new artist, you have to know how often new content has to be delivered to your audience without pissing them off. Right? There is so much, there's too much as well.
Possibly, although everyone's got such a short attention span these days, I don't know.
That's true. Like, who's actually read a book in the last 6 months? Anybody? Like a literal book? Yeah. I saw 3 hands. One of them was Benji's. Oh, and Scott, yes. Me too. No, that's the thing. I started reading War and Peace, and I've realized I'm never going to finish it because I don't have the attention span anymore. But
we can get it back. Don't worry.
We can get it back.
We do slow radio.
But that's what I'm seeing, and we're all in a music industry that is time short and attention short, and yet we're constantly working to get people interested in a new idea, forcing them to say, give us some time for our new idea.
Yeah, and then once you've got that new idea over, how do you then develop that idea into an idea that's...
Well, how do you, Alan?
Well, there's new ideas.
Tell us. You're the elder statesman of the panel. That's what we called him when we when we were meeting earlier. So, statesman.
Well, yeah, I think you have to be brave and stick with it and have a longer-term view. I mean, for the network, I'm thinking kind of 5 years hence. I know the kind of things I might want to be doing in 5 years' time, but I know the detail will be very, very different, because things will develop in a way that I have no idea about. And it's kind of giving yourself that sense of direction, but the ability to fill it creatively with something that you wouldn't have foreseen. And it's, you asked me to speak as an elder statesman. As an elder statesman, things feel rushed at the time, but you look back on it and see that you had more time than you thought. I mean, I'm constantly wanting to do the next new thing now, but actually I can now look back and see how things built up over time, and the patience that was required and that actually added something to it. So there's an elder statesman's view.
Can you think that way now?
Well, I think that if you're how not to over saturate the market and put things out and get lack of time, lack of people's attention span. I think you have to, whatever you do, just do it well and make sure it goes back to the idea of having a brand and an MO and something that you offer that no one else can at that particular point in time. And whether that's once every 6 months or once every 2 days on Instagram, I think you just need to embrace it and do it well.
So for all the entrepreneurs in the room, I guess that was more than half of you, how many have 5-year plans? Okay. Less than put your hands up when that said you were entrepreneurs. And thinking conceptually, it's again, how do we strengthen new business is not being too constrained while still knowing exactly, both our managers in the room said, well, our 10-year plan is to play arenas. It's a pretty generic goal, I would say. What arena? Does it matter? No?
No, but it has to be. You have to have,
It has to be an arena.
Yeah, you have to have a big goal in your head.
I want to
and
retire.
You have to know where you're going. It has to be, great objective. And I agree with Alan that you really have to be brave, And if you think that you're doing something right and you're sure it may be successful and it deserves it, you just have to do it. Because in our case, for example, with Russian music being exported, we could have sit and thought that, okay, nobody is interested in Russian music, nobody's interested in Russian market anywhere else in the world. And we could spend, 5 more years just thinking about it and being scared. And you really, if you believe in something, you just have to do it.
And I think maybe a couple of years ago, people, as an answer to that question, would have said, I'd like a gold disc or I'd like a platinum disc on my wall, but it's just that's not sales aren't the focus of our business anymore.
You can buy those on eBay.
It's just a DVD.
Scratch out their name, just put your aha, Mia. All right.
I might do that.
I know someone who did that. No, it's
cheaper.
It's the same. It's and also changing your goals all the time.
But Shane, I mean, you're a world expert in the Canadian music funding system. And there is a funding system in Canada, which does buy time for people. And that could work one way, it could work another way. I mean, how does that seem to you? Because Factor and various other things that funding schemes that exist in Canada allow people to develop over 2 or 3 albums rather than 1 album.
Well, there's this concept of, I think, entrepreneurialism to me can sometimes be ageist. Like, it's focused on youth, it's focused on you have to be young, and, you know, my mother is an entrepreneur, you know, but in Canada there is less of a focus on someone's age and their past. If they want to produce something, if they want funding for their 5th album, if there's a business case for them to be funded for their 5th album, then they'll be funded. There isn't, there's not as much of a competition. And we do see this, I think it's the same in Spain, at least from my knowledge of Spain, which is cursory, is that there is a focus on always being new rather than a focus on always being good. Or is that just, or am I wrong? Again, I'm trying to stir the pot here.
Well, I mean, you were trying to get us. You were trying to get a conversation about urgency and
yes,
and how that affects the creative output. And in Canada, because of the funding system, there's a bit of the urgency, possibly, arguably removed.
Arguably too much, and then people just get
is that
really
good or bad?
lazy.
Was the question I was asking.
Well, I think it can be good and bad. If anyone's not familiar with the Canadian system, Canada per capita gives more money to musicians than any other country in the world. So you can move there if you want. But it does stifle entrepreneurialism. So to some entrepreneurs in Canada, being an entrepreneur is just filling out forms to get funding and then getting the funding and then filling out another form to get funding, and that's it. This is not everybody. There's some amazing entrepreneurs in Canada. And that is a problem because it stifles creativity. And maybe, you know, urgency comes out of fear in some ways. And I always think being an entrepreneur, and you know, definitely every band is an entrepreneur. Every single artist is an entrepreneur, in my opinion. And usually it's about just dealing with your own fear of whether it be failure or acceptance or other types of things, and you know, how have you dealt with that as an entrepreneur? Our wonderful managers on the panel, do you think about that all the time, or do you just push it to one side?
I think it's a constant worry as a manager because you're in a way very dependent on your artist's success. But yeah, no, it's just push it, sweep it under the carpet, don't worry about it, and just keep fighting.
Yeah?
Yeah, I agree with Mio, but it is important to be always good, you know, you cannot be just, especially in Russia when we don't have such a system, you really have to prove every time that, you know, you deserve it and that you deserve this place on the market, and especially when we start talking about investments to music, which is relatively new for Russian market. You really have to prove that you deserve these investments. You really have to prove that you are creative and that, you know, you will not stop in 1 year, and that this project can last long enough and be good enough.
So we have a few minutes. Does anyone have any questions? I hope so. No? No one wants to be first? You're all afraid? There we go. These are the entrepreneurs in the audience right here. There should be a mic walking around for questions. No? Yes, there is. Sorry. Gracias. And just introduce yourself to the audience as well, because we are all one network here. Everyone should meet everyone in this room.
Good afternoon, I'm Sherwin Bryce, songwriter artist from the island of St. Lucia. And we are actually developing our creative industries as you guys speak, and we've learned a lot from what Canada is doing, and it's interesting to hear about Russia and the other countries. I guess one of my questions is, like you said, the funding does help stifle creativity. So where does a developing market maybe like draw the line as to, or like how does Canada set credibility to say, okay, you gave me some money to do a project, how do I weigh the success of that project so that next time when you apply, I can say, well, okay, last time I gave you 50,000, you did this, what are your results? Am I just gonna give you money again? Or how do I rate your success so I know to go on to the next or fund the next project?
It's a complicated system in Canada because it's been around for nearly 40 years. Usually neutral judgment So the people who are adjudicating the application are not the same people who are judging the final results. And, maybe speaking, like I worked on the fund that Alan spoke of called Momentum, and that's run by a lady in the audience in the UK. And the general principle of this fund is the artist tells the fund what they want to use the money for. And then they're mainly judged on the success of how that money was used in relation to their goal. So Canada, it's different because there's many different funds for different things. And it can stifle, like there's some regions in Canada where it's better to be essentially on welfare for music than it is to be trying to earn a living. So I always think that when it comes to state intervention, it should be based on the specific needs of the individual artist. And then they're judged on what the artist judged themselves as. So I always judge artists on what they judge themselves as. If they've succeeded, then more or less it's a success. And lastly, making a commercial success is only one type of success. There's other types of success, and some people forget that. Alan? He's the funding expert.
Well, when we were setting up the Momentum scheme, we did some analysis, or you did some analysis, of what the market failure was, or what the needs at particular stages in musicians' careers were. So it wasn't just throwing money at it willy-nilly. It was quite well targeted to that kind of. We thought there was plenty of help around, and the entrepreneurial kind of impulse to get to the first stage, but the second stage just became so much harder because things weren't just new, and getting to the next stage was more expensive, more complicated, and so that's why we targeted that stage. So we weren't just kind of throwing money around.
This goes back to, I think that there should be a network developed for companies in their second to third year, because there's so many startup networks, but sometimes companies that are kind of 2 years in that are getting to the next level don't realize that a lot of other companies face similar challenges because we don't talk to each other. Was there another question? We have time for 2 or 3 more, I believe. And remember, Russian showcase soon with free, with complimentary libations in 20 minutes.
Hello, Good evening. My name is Emilio Moreu. I'm building a platform, an outsourced platform for music. And I would like to know your opinion about all these outsourcing platforms like Indiegogo or Kickstarter, and how, if a band should promote themselves through this, through a campaign, through Kickstarter, and how it develops, to become famous, on these campaigns, like crowdfunding campaigns.
You want to take this?
We did. We used a crowdfunding campaign for some to fund some physical merch for one of my artists, but it wasn't target based. It was just a few weeks before it was going to be released. It was a way to pre-order the new album, but I think I think it can work. I think it can work for some artists. It worked for Amanda Palmer.
Yeah, it sure did.
I generally think they're a good idea. I don't have much experience working with them, though, I'm afraid, so I can't give.
There are experts who develop these systems here at BIME, but I think it's always making the not gifts or whatever you call it, some things really interesting. I knew one band that flew an audience member to their hometown and cooked them dinner and did a private concert for something way more than the amount of money that they pledged. Things like that.
I know that Run the Jewels did a really good one, where if they raised enough money, they would do an entire cover version of their album just using cat meows. And they reached their goal, and they have to do it now.
There you go. I knew an artist that that is a trained painter decorator, and they said they would paint someone's house for a certain amount. I guess it's about being creative and trying to do things that aren't just about the music, that are about the relationship around the music. Right? Yeah. Do they have crowdfunding in Russia?
Yeah, we do have it. I'm not a big expert either because we don't use it with my bands, with the bands I'm managing. In Russia, it doesn't work that well yet, and very often it looks, kind of desperate because bands do it when they really need money and everyone knows they don't have it at all, and that's why, it has kind of a bad image in Russia, but hopefully it will develop as well.
Change the domain name when they really need money and they don't have it at all. .ru. Should change that. Okay. We've got quite a few. We have 4 minutes, so there's a few people around.
I just want to add some information to the crowdfunding thing because the University of Cambridge, the Institute of Alternative Financing, I think, they have done a study on crowdfunding worldwide. And that study is to be released until the end of the year. So somewhere between now and December, they are going to release a study, and it's all about crowdfunding and things. So maybe you want to look into that.
Great. It's such an old way. It's like doing the car wash. Did anyone do car washes when they were kids to raise money? I sold chocolate to raise money for my hockey team, door to door. It's crowdfunding. Chocolate almonds, actually. Yeah. At least they weren't chocolate raisins. Why would any? All right, moving on.
Hi, Shane. I was going to point out to the people that are interested in the crowdfunding, come talk to me. I know how this stuff works, and I will give you lots of boring information, like the fact that you shouldn't start a crowdfunding campaign until you have at least 30% of your funding, and that's numbers you'll find from Indiegogo's own playbook, etc. and so forth. So just come find me.
Go find her. Her name is Tanya. Does anyone else have a question?
I do. Hello.
I'm joking.
So I'm Vanessa. I'm director of PRS Foundation. I'm the person who's running this Momentum Fund that's been talked about a lot. And my question, maybe mainly to the managers, is if we're talking about how we strengthen new entrepreneurs, how much are you prepared to, I suppose, allow them to fail to learn from that experience? Because we're always talking about how failure or obstacles can really help people. And the reason I'm asking that is because our fund, Momentum, actually attracts 2,500 or 2,200 applications. We've funded about 96 projects.
I've applied for it, didn't get it.
Oh, you didn't? Oh, I'm sorry, but you definitely try again. But some of the reassuring feedback we've had is that the process of putting that plan together has actually really helped a lot of the bands. That's at least what some of them have told us. So that's the question really, whether going through those things and being knocked back is still useful.
Yeah, definitely, because I think it helps you plan, it helps you lay out, if you haven't already, the objectives that you really want to focus on and where you need help and where you need money. So whether it's for the recording or whether it's for the touring, I think that's what you have to specify, don't you? You have to.
There's other things.
So yeah, I think it helps you try and push for those goals and plan kind of what you need to do to get there, and if you don't get it, reapply and kind of. I think more feedback would be useful, so that you can actually go back if you're reapplying to try and maybe apply more successfully.
Yeah, and I think that raises a really good point, and that's something that I've been incredibly blessed with is mentors. I am incredibly lucky to know lots of incredibly smart people who tell me when I'm not being smart, and often a lot of people maybe in Russia there's a pride issue of people not wanting to accept their criticism. And I've gone through that. I was not very good with. I'm better with it now because I'm so used to being criticized. So, But it's being an entrepreneur. Also, I think, is accepting criticism and dealing with it, like or feedback when you fail in a funding application. Right?
Yeah, I totally agree. Every time you fail, you analyze what mistakes you've made, and it makes you move. Because if you don't want to move, you cannot call yourself entrepreneur. And if you stop just after one mistake.
Anyone perfect must be lying, right? We have one more. If anyone has any final questions, we have one more. Oh, down there. It's coming. We're on our way. Oh, it's great. We love it when people ask questions. It's It's really appreciative.
Hello, I'm Carlos Calleja. I'm a local freelance consultant here from Bilbao. This is a question especially for the BBC representative, but for everybody at the table, and it has not a lot of connection with the topics that we have discussed, but it's a question that I would like to raise. Yesterday in the panel about the Spanish music market, the experts recognized that the main growth factor these days about music is, of course, music streaming, okay? Either through Spotify, either through YouTube and the like. But as I'm not a digital native, of course, I still think that about the power, I believe in the power of radio compared to, streaming platforms in order to promote musical bands and to give awareness for them. Everybody is talking a lot about Spotify, about YouTube, and I still believe a lot, and even much more, on the power of the radio compared to the power of the streaming platforms. I would like to know your opinion, generally, not only of you as a BBC representative, but also from the people at the table, because if you have a good product, which is a band, you have to promote it, and then you have to think about the channels to promote it. And the channels are streaming platforms, but also, of course, the alternative platform would always be the radio. So that's my question.
That's a huge question, and it kind of occupies the BBC a lot. Our younger people aren't listening to the radio. They're getting things mainly online. But there is still a hunger for some kind of surprise curation of some kind, so that people can discover things they didn't know they might have discovered. And that's certainly why linear broadcast is remaining strong amongst other age groups. I mean, the younger, kind of under 16s, it's quite different. But those ages who do listen to the radio, they want to be surprised. And they want an offer that isn't necessarily what they expect. And there's a generation, 25 to 40 in particular, hugely hungry for that kind of thing. And that's where a lot of new music discovery can come in. But if you look at streaming services, there's a lot of curation going on there at the moment with people doing playlists. And our Radio 1, which is our kind of youth channel, has started doing playlist downloads, because we can give downloads for 30 days, and then they disappear. Those are proving really, really popular amongst younger age groups. I mean, it's complex and changing all the time.
I always think, I've never met a band that isn't excited about being played on the radio, but I don't meet that many bands who are like, I just got streamed on Spotify, so the radio, Spotify and everyone else is, well, it's incredibly important and it's very valuable, and there's lots of tools, but in radio, especially in developing music markets, radio is massively important. In Canada, radio is really the only way you can break an artist still. And in the United States, radio is so important that it's essentially a payola scheme where you have to pay your way on. But it's, I don't think that one is against the other.
I think, yeah.
There's no, they work together. They're mutually beneficial.
They're totally connected. Things like Shazam now influence. Shazam charts will have a direct impact on what's played on the radio, and online stats, when a radio plugger goes to a meeting with a radio channel producer, they will bring their bands, and the producer will look at the online stats, and if a band has no online stats, it's, unless that producer really, really believes in that band, it's quite unlikely that they'll get played. So there is definitely.
We have to stop.
Sorry.
We've been given the frog with the cane.
It's all connected. It's all.
Yes, thank you to our panelists so much. So a round of applause for these three wonderful people.